Welcome back. Today, instead of solving puzzles or analyzing a game in which I played horribly, I'm just going to tell you about how I made my own chessboard. Now, first disclaimer, I'm not an expert woodworker or tool user. If you search on YouTube for do-it-yourself chessboard or DIY chess set, you can find some really good videos with some really expert woodworkers who make beautiful chessboards. And if that's what you're looking for, go ahead and hit that search and you'll see what I'm talking about. But I'm about, I think, as good with woodworking as I am at playing chess, which is to say intermediate or possibly even mediocre. But mine didn't cost that much and doesn't require any special skills or even tools, really. All I needed was a square of plywood, which is cost about $15 at the Home Depot or Lowe's, one of those places. Mine was 2 feet by 2 feet square. And I think I went with a half inch or maybe just slightly less than a half an inch thick. But you can obviously pay a little bit more for a thicker one if you want it to be more sturdy. If you haven't worked with plywood, the thinner they are, the more likely they are to warp. The thicker they are, they get pretty heavy pretty quick. Anyway, I kind of went for a balance there. The only other thing you need is sandpaper, a pencil, a straight edge or a ruler, something to measure and draw straight lines with, and at least 2 colors of paint. Now, in my case, I had all of these things already except for the plywood square, so this whole thing cost me about $15. If you don't already have paint or sandpaper, your cost is going to go up a little bit. Hopefully you already have a pencil and a straight edge, but not everybody does, so I understand. Now, the first thing I did was use my straight edge ruler here. This is a metal ruler that's about 3 feet long, but I marked off my squares, starting with 2 inches from the edge of the wood on all sides so I could draw my border. And then I just cut that in half to draw the center lines, and then cut those in half and cut those in half and ended up with these squares. As you can see in this image, I wrote a B in all the squares that were going to be painted black. One thing I didn't want to do is start painting the wrong squares and get that messed up and have to go back and do a lot of it over. Now, the next thing I did, I actually did use a tool, which you don't have to do this step, but I was afraid that when I started painting, my paint was going to go over and I was not going to get these lines straight. So I decided to use this cutting tool that I already had to cut a very shallow groove along each line. Probably 1/8 of an inch or less deep. The idea was that as I painted each square, a little paint might drip into the groove, but it wouldn't go over overlapping on the squares. But again, if you're confident in your painting abilities, you don't have to do this step. I just did it because I knew my painting abilities weren't great. Now, this is a close-up of the grooves here after I had cut them. You can see that they're not very deep. The next step is to use the sandpaper. I don't have a photo of that, but you want to sand off all those rough edges and all the way around the borders of the boards, the surface of the board. You want it to be as free from splinters and rough edges as possible. And so that probably took as long as anything else is just manually sanding the entire thing. And the next thing I did was I started painting. Now, one thing I have learned about painting wood is that no matter how thick of a paint you get, primer included, all that sort of thing, the first coat will just soak right into the wood. I didn't want to use my more expensive paints that I had in short supply for my first coat, so I used a cheaper paint that I had left over from painting my living room to coat the entire wood a couple of times. This is this really light color that you see here. It's actually a really pale green, but regardless, it was a low-cost paint. I had a lot of it left over, so I painted the board with that, allowed it to dry, painted over again, so that could soak into the wood. Then when I started painting the squares, that part wouldn't soak in and I wouldn't waste my black gloss and white gloss paints. Now here you can see I've already painted the first coat of the black squares with, I just had a small, like I think a 1-quart can of Rust-Oleum gloss black. And then once I had gone over that a couple of times, I put gloss white, a high gloss white enamel paint on the opposite squares. And then I wasn't sure what to do with the border, but I had some silver gloss paint, metallic looking paint left over from yet another project a couple of years ago. So I used that to go around the edges, and as you can see, I kind of did just a random looking brush stroke. I think the idea is I wanted it to look more like a beaten metal than a plywood. But anyway, this is about what it looked like when I got done. The 4 holes that you see drilled, 2 on each side, I had the idea that I would hang this up in the garage. I already knew how far apart that the studs were behind the drywall in the walls, so I knew how far apart to drill these holes, and then put 2 screws in the wall so I can hang this up from either edge when I'm not using it. And my finished product looks about like this. And again, it's 2 feet by 4 feet. I actually have it here. I will just hold it up so you can see it's a good sized board. And the last thing that I did to it, I don't know if you can see, there's a little bit of a shine to it, is I got some clear coat polyurethane, I guess kind of like a shellac, that I painted over this whole thing, and that helped fill in the grooves as well. I think I used a whole little can of that stuff on this, 2 or 3, maybe 4 coats, to protect it and give it a little bit of a shine. And one cool thing about this is that I also, I didn't know what to do with the other side. And one of my kids said, oh, why not just put another chessboard on the other side? So that's what I did. Now, on the other side, I did not take the time to cut the grooves. And I also did not care about whether the squares, the paint overlapped. I decided to make it look just a little bit amateurish and messy anyway. And I also, as you can see in the photo there on your screen, that I wrote with hand, I think with a Sharpie, the names of the ranks and files. But anyway, it was a lot of fun. Didn't take a terrible lot of work, and except for cutting those grooves, I didn't use any tools. Just as you saw in the materials list right here, square of plywood, which cost about $15, sandpaper, which I already had on hand, pencil, ruler, and at least 2 colors of paint. I guess you could probably, if you only had 1 color of paint on hand, you could probably get away with just 1 color of paint. Just paint every other square that color, and then leave the rest a wood surface. And then if you wanted to cover it with a shellac or something like that. Also depends on how long you want it to last, how nice you want it to look. Mine's not perfect, as I said at the beginning. I'm not an expert woodworker. I do this sort of thing about as well as I play chess. If you are looking at the holes, you can see that I chipped out some wood when I drilled through them. There's rough edges around those that I had to sand a little bit. I never bothered filling them in or trying to perfect them. The idea of this wasn't to be a work of art, but to just have a good solid board that I can hang up in the garage, and whenever I want to, when there's no car in there, I can set it on a work table and play chess in the open air. So anyway, thanks for watching. I hope you found that interesting. If this is the kind of thing that you're interested in, doesn't cost that much, doesn't take terrible amount of time. Thank you.